Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Arlene Hoffa. I am the current chair from 2016 of the Monterey County chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. It is amazing to see all of you here. If you are a registered card-carrying member of the ACLU and you live in Monterey County, you are part of this group. If you are not, I invite you to go online and find the application and join if you're so inclined to do so. It is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Welsh, fondly known as Mickey. She teaches constitutional law at the Monterey College of Law, and she has been a long-time member of the ACLU, has served on the board of directors for the Northern California affiliate, and has worked closely with many of the attorneys up there. She will be introducing our guest speaker.
Thank you. Isn't this amazing?
Absolutely.
It's wonderful that you're all here. It's wonderful that we're all here together. We need to stay together, and we will stay together. My pleasure right now, though, is to introduce our speaker, Alan Schlosser. I've known Alan since I became involved in the ACLU in 1978. But he was there even before that. He joined the ACLU as a staff attorney in 1976, and he is still there as a staff attorney to this day. He is senior attorney at the ACLU of Northern California, and I would venture to say if there's been an important civil liberties and constitutional law case in California over the last 40 years, Alan Schlosser has probably had something to do with it. He came here from Boston, where he worked as a staff attorney in California and Arizona. He worked for the United Farm Workers, the AFL-CIO, and he taught law school at the University of San Francisco Law School, at Brooklyn Law School, and at Columbia Law School. He's litigated numerous landmark cases. He worked with Michelle Alexander, who some of you may remember as the author, in Rodriguez versus California Highway Patrol, a racial profiling case in California. And he represented the California First Amendment Coalition versus Woodford, which dealt with the death penalty and opening the curtains so the death penalty is exposed as it should be. And he also has been effective right here in Monterey County. He was part of the representation in the lawsuit against the Monterey County Jail for violating the conditions of the inmates and denying needed health care and needed disability accommodations. And in the past, I can recall, he was a staff attorney when we as cooperating attorneys here in Monterey, I brought the case of Ringler versus City of Monterey when the city put a nativity scene up right in front of City Hall. We represented a 14-year-old boy in that action, and Alan was helpful. And another case that comes to mind that Alan helped us work on was when an undocumented high school girl was so smart and so successful, she was chosen to go to Girls State, you know, the legislative, mock legislator that they put on for high school kids. And her school district wouldn't let her go because she's undocumented. We had a lawsuit ready to file. We sent them the lawsuit and said, we're going to file this if you don't let her go. And Alan Schlosser was the one who called my colleague Michael Manlin, at that time was working on the case with me, and said, they caved in. Michael's reaction was, oh darn. All right, it wasn't darn. But Alan and the ACLU were so effective that the district decided they'd rather not litigate with the ACLU on that point, so the girl went. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Senior Staff Attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California, Alan Schlosser.
Wow, it's great to be here. It's great that I'm able to ride on Elliot's coattails and have such a good crowd. I have to correct Nikki for one thing. She's described me as a staff attorney, and 40 years later, he's still a staff attorney. Something about that I was legal director. I want to point that out. It was a little bit of a promotion. My mother would have wanted me to. So, the Constitution under siege. That's reminiscent of talks that I gave like this. Oh. This way. Okay. Reminiscent of talks that I gave like this after 9/11, when Bush and Cheney and the Patriot Act and Rumsfeld were also putting the Constitution under siege. But you know, on reflection, because of doing this, I had to look more carefully about what's going on and read more. It's not just an assault on the Constitution that we're seeing. I think it's an assault on our basic humanity. If I had one thing to say to President Trump, I think what I would say, and I know from looking around the room that many of you will know this reference, I would say what Joseph Welch, a great attorney, famously said to Senator Joe McCarthy during the Armin McCarthy hearings, "Sir, have you no sense of decency?" That's what I would say. I want to talk about some of the policies, but what I found striking in my crash course for this is, and I think it's important to keep listening to the words and the language that's coming out of this administration, which to me is unprecedented. Starting with Steve Bannon, the chief strategist for Trump, who laid out the Trump media policy when he told the New York Times and the Washington Post that they were the opposition party and they should just shut up and listen. There goes the First Amendment. It sounds like something you might have heard between Nixon and Haldeman on the tapes, but this was something that Bannon grabbed them over and said, "I want you to quote." They're proud of this. Frightening. The other phrase that gets to me, extreme vetting. Where did they come up with that? They could say they want to question more closely refugees. Okay, you call it strict vetting. You call it careful vetting. But no, it's extreme vetting. What does extreme call it? To me, and I don't think I'm being overly paranoid, waterboarding, Abu Ghraib. And maybe that's not even a metaphor. Who knows what's going to go on in the airports when they get these people, and lawyers like the ACLU don't get them out? Who knows what they're going to be subjected to? And Trump, even after these court decisions, is still talking about extreme vetting. And then just finally, the spectacle of the intentional bullying and humiliation of the president of Mexico and that whole country on the first visit, it was just unbelievable. It was just unbelievable. And if you thought, well, it was an aberration, you should listen to what Nikki Haley, one of the moderates in the administration, said in her first speech to the UN. She said, "For those who don't have our back, we're taking names." This is the mentality that we're dealing with. And so it's not surprising that the policies that are coming out are just as extreme. We're not talking, I don't think, about conservative, neoconservative, right-wing, the Tea Party. We're talking, in my mind, about thuggery and xenophobia and bullying and racism and the big lie. Those are the hallmarks so far of this administration. In terms of the policies that we're going to have to be fighting, there aren't huge surprises. It's kind of a cruel irony that President Trump is probably the first president in United States history to actually implement his campaign promises in the first 10 days. But the reason he can do that, he can just take a promise and sign an executive order, is because he's not operating under constitutional limits. He's certainly not operating under congressional limits. He's not operating under notions of fairness or political or economic realities, and he's certainly not operating with the truth as any guide. And so he can move very quickly. And that's why this court decision that I'll talk about a little later was the first kind of official standing up to him, but it's really just an initial salvo. There's a long way to go. The ACLU had identified two priorities that we had to be ready for, and he has shown us to be prescient, and they're pretty obvious. One of them was immigration, and the other was protecting the Muslim community. And I wanted to talk mostly about those, although there are so many other issues that I could address that are under siege. You know, if you've read the executive orders that have come out about immigration, one thing is very clear. During the campaign, at one point, Trump was talking about mass deportation with a mass deportation force, 11 million undocumented immigrants. Then he backed off. Oh, I didn't really mean that. You know, I meant much less. You know, I meant 1 million. I meant 800,000. It's now clear that mass deportation is what we're going to be facing. What this executive order does is it completely guts the system that we've been operating under, and President Obama has been operating under, where they set priorities for who is most eligible for deportation, with serious criminal offenses being the one they're supposedly targeting. And even under that limit, President Obama's administration set a record for deportations. That's now all gone. The executive order says that you are a priority if you commit a criminal offense. No serious criminal offense, it covers a misdemeanor. If you're charged or arrested for a criminal offense, that's enough. But it doesn't even stop there. He says, if you commit acts that you could have been arrested for, you're a priority deportee. So it's all bets are off. And of course, when you open the door for eligible deportees, especially like the Latino community, it's everyone who looks like they might be an immigrant, and it goes far beyond people who are undocumented. And the other thing that is a hallmark of his immigration policy is to, and this is I think very relevant to work that you've been doing, is to tremendously increase the amount of cooperation between the federal government's deportation force and state and local law enforcement officials. That's been kind of downplayed under President Obama, but he made it very clear that they're going to be looking to sign contracts and memorandums of understanding so that local law enforcement can participate in immigration raids and enforcement. And not only that, but the way it's set up, it provides tremendous power and even incentives for local law enforcement who, for whatever reason, racism, politics, want to go after the undocumented or immigrant communities. They don't have to arrest them and then call INS. They don't have to convict them. Basically, any contact with the criminal justice system is going to convert that person into a deportable alien if they're not documented. So every kid who's stopped on a gang stop and gets put in one of these ridiculous gang databases, it's open season for ICE, and they're hiring 10,000 more immigration agents to make that real. So that's really scary. And to do this, there is going to have to be, I think the word that people are using, an explosion of immigration raids. Large-scale raids at workplaces, in neighborhoods, in schools. There hasn't been that much of that in recent years because there's so many civil liberties, civil rights abuses happen. There's been a big outcry in local communities, but this is definitely what's on the horizon because there's no way they can get the kind of people they're going for. And so that's something that you're going to see, and it's going to raise questions about how much your local police and sheriffs should be cooperating with those raids. One of the problems the other thing is, once people are in the system, they have all kinds of new mechanisms to keep the trains running quickly. They're going to hold people until their hearing on the merits, which can be, it's now 625 days. They're not going to release people who are picked up by ICE. Even though they're not a flight risk, even though they have ties to the community, he's very clear that he doesn't want any more of that. Once they're caught, they stay caught until they go through this hearing a year from now, which of course will lead many people to just ask to leave voluntary deportation, but that's part of the point. So it's a really grim time. I'm going to get to the good stuff. I'll make sure I have that. And as we've seen this weekend, our other priority, the Muslim community's vulnerabilities, was illustrated by the atrocities of this weekend. You know, he issued an order in which he banned anyone from Syria to be admitted into the United States, and put a 120-day hold on people coming from 6 other countries, all Muslim countries. It's interesting that of the 7 countries, not one person from those countries has been involved in a fatal terrorist incident. All the horrible incidents we've read about, none involve people from those countries. In fact, he justifies it with 9/11, but all the 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, but they're not on the list, which may have something to do with oil and alliances. And, you know, just think, clearly, and also, although they're going to have arguments that we're not discriminating on the basis of religion, that the cat gets let out of the bag by the fact that Christians are exempt. Christians get a priority. Christians from these same 7 countries. It was really well explained by President Trump why he gave that preference. He said, well, everyone from those countries are getting their heads chopped off, but Christians are getting their heads chopped off more. So that's the reason. And I think another thing to keep in mind is, here you have officially sanctioned Islamophobia. It's just, you know, anyone can see that everyone knows who he wants to keep out. And this is just going to lead to a real explosion of Islamophobia, I think, in communities, in schools, in bullying, in the workplace. There's going to be a lot more discrimination, a lot more hate violence. And it's interesting, you know, I keep getting a little bit nostalgic for President Bush. He didn't change. But this is different. This is hugely different. When President Bush announced the whole panoply of very harsh measures in the wake of 9/11, if you remember, at the same presentation, he spoke out strongly against racial profiling. He introduced legislation about racial profiling. None of that here. There's nothing. You know, and I think because, you know, I've heard of Trump and Steve Bannon and people like that, that's muddying the message. You know, saying don't racially profile, it's not because you're Muslim, it is because they're Muslim. And I'm not going to give them any credit for that, but it's kind of striking, the comparison. And the civil rights and civil liberties of Muslims and immigrants, they're not the only ones who are going to, they're the first wave of victims. But it's going to affect anyone who has gotten protection from federal civil rights laws. African Americans, Asian Americans, LGBT people, the whole range of people who are protected by the civil rights law are going to be affected because they've already gutted the 2 agencies that are there to fight for civil rights in the government. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department and the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. They have been tremendously helpful. They have a lot of power, a lot of people, and a lot of clout. Not surprisingly, both of those agencies have been headed by two ACLU lawyers, Vanita Gupta and Catherine Lehman, who was at the ACLU of Southern California, who did a fabulous job. But they were continuing, with President Obama's blessing, to doing civil rights work as you're supposed to do in those agencies. Jeff Sessions is not going to replace Vanita Gupta with anyone who cares anything about civil rights, except that they've gone too far. They've gone too far with transgender students. They've gone too far, he's already said this, in intervening in with police departments like Ferguson, like Baltimore, like Chicago. They're not going to have any of that kind of federal support. You know, their mantra around the police is Blue Lives Matter. Well, blue lives do matter, but for them, this administration, it's a code. Blue lives do, a code for aggressive stop and frisks in minority communities, more military hardware, more surveillance. You know, take the handcuffs and restraints off the cops. That's what they mean by Blue Lives Matter. And we're no longer going to have these bulwark federal agencies by our side. And in San Francisco, we're involved in a situation with the police. We've already felt that. So, the bright spot. It says right here, there may be a bright spot. Well, a couple of things I would say. And, you know, I know what's going on and how this feels up in San Francisco. I'm not sure how it feels down here, but we have felt very clearly that the extremism of the administration has resulted in state and local officials being willing to stand up and fight for rights that I don't think they would have done before this shift. You know, I think around the country, a lot of people refer to what they're doing right now as they're joining the resistance. When Dianne Feinstein says that she's joining the resistance, you know that it's kind of that Bob Dylan line, something's happening here, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Miss Feinstein? But it's great. And, you know, Jerry Brown, the new Attorney General, the state legislature, which has already adopted some really progressive laws, and everyone seems motivated in California, but it's not just California. But I think that for people who are involved in advocacy, the limits are that we should raise the bar. There's more opportunity. We should take advantage of this opportunity because, you know, more and more our position is being perceived as a mainstream position. We saw some of that in 9/11, but, you know, 9/11 took place under the shadow of that horrific tragedy. You know, really caps, and people were afraid. There are problems now. ISIS is scary, but there's not the equivalent thing. This is being driven by an ideological agenda, and a lot of local people, and maybe someday someone in the Republican Party will stand up, and that will affect the congressional vote. I'm not holding my breath, but in terms of what we're doing specifically, I assume most of you read about yesterday's litigation, which was planned, although I don't think anyone knew. It's kind of why you go to law school. You know, I don't think anyone knew they were going to enforce this refugee Muslim ban on people in the air. And so in San Francisco and New York, people got calls, you know, they're holding us, and when we asked, who do we talk to, they said President Trump. And I think it's really interesting that not only were there a flurry of lawyers, but there were a ton of protesters, which I think is great. And a perfect example of how the ACLU, I think, sees itself. We were organizing the protesters, and we were, doing the legal work. In terms of that particular case, I think I don't have details. I've looked at it. I mean, the essence of the argument is that the procedure that they were using completely took away what little due process rights refugees have. But all of these refugees had been adjudicated admittable by the United States abroad. These weren't just people who hopped on a plane. And the other argument, which I think is going to be the bedrock argument, is an equal protection argument, that it's discriminating on the basis of religion and on the basis of national origin. And again, Trump's political decision to exempt Christians is a real gift to us in terms of making the argument, even if their heads are getting chopped off. I think you only get one head chopped off, so I don't quite get it. So the order is a nationwide class order for now, and it prevents their removal. It doesn't get them out of detention. So there's a long way to go on that. There are going to be all kinds of other challenges in terms of what they're going to subject Muslim community to. There's the registry, where Muslims have to register and stay in contact if they're from 25 different countries, which, again, with all these actions, there are First Amendment arguments because it's targeting religion, because all the 25 countries are Muslim. And also violates the Privacy Act, which says you can't collect data based on religion. And then there's the FBI. The FBI is kind of looking good these days compared to this, but that won't last, I don't think. During 9/11, the FBI was the lead agency that kind of flooded the Muslim community and Muslim mosques with all kinds of surveillance, questioning, setting up people, trying to get informants, with a lot of abuses. And under federal law, they don't need any reasonable suspicion to do that kind of surveillance. They don't need that. And one problem that we've identified, and I think would apply here as well, is that a lot of that kind of work is done in what they call joint terrorism task forces, which is kind of like on the immigration side. Several local sheriffs or police get deputized and work with the FBI on that kind of work because they want the local knowledge. And we've argued with some success in San Francisco that there are California law and the California Constitution require reasonable suspicion. So you can't send your deputies over to the FBI and now of course we're calling it Trump's FBI, and let them violate our local laws. Well, that has gotten a great response from Mayor Lee, even the police chief. Might not be so easy in other places, but the group, including the ACLU that's been pushing that, is going to be doing it in other communities. So keep your eyes open for them. In terms of raids, as I said, they're called raids for a good reason. They're operations in which they arrive fast to get people running, because once they run, they don't need any reasonable suspicion to go after them. It's all based on racial profiling. It's incredibly intimidating, and all kinds of Fourth Amendment abuses. And we have a history of fighting that, and we're geared up to fight those again. Sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are a real target in these executive orders because sanctuary cities, just the idea of a sanctuary city must give Trump a nightmare. It's everything. It's kind of like Reagan had the city on a hill. The sanctuary city is everything that he does not want. It's a counterpoise to his vision. I don't know what he called his cities, fortress cities. And he's going after them, he says, and defunding any city that is a sanctuary city, broadly defined. There are good legal arguments, I'm happy to say, in fighting that, and they will be raised vigorously, not just by us, but by the cities. But there really is no congressional authority to let him take away all federal money. And although states' rights is usually not our big rallying flag, the Founding Fathers in their wisdom added the 10th Amendment, which does speak of the rights of states. And an argument that's well recognized is that the federal government cannot commandeer the states and the cities to carry out federal policies. And this has come up in all different contexts. But I think it's a very strong argument. So I think sanctuary cities have strong arguments. That's going to be easier, I think, than some of the others. There's so many other issues I could talk about, although they're important. Some of them I don't know much about, so I'm going to skip them, but not much. But there are tremendous threats coming up to almost everything that we've been fighting for. From reproductive justice to maintaining funding. We're lucky in that area to have very strong laws protecting our kind of system that supports choice. But they're going to be coming at us every which way in terms of funding, in terms of trying to establish a religious right, for example, for hospitals to refuse to provide reproductive health care. And in terms of the police, which is something I've been particularly working on in the last 6 months, there was a moment after Ferguson when the police reform movement came together with a lot more force. There was Black Lives Matter, there were groups speaking out, and they were heard. And it turned out that a lot of police chiefs and a lot of police really wanted reform. And we're working collaboratively, as we are in San Francisco, under the auspices of the Justice Department. But that's all over the Justice Department part, and it's going to be, and the Trump administration. There's a very influential book that has been read by a lot of police officers called 21st Century Policing. President Obama's plan for 21st century policing. And it lays out in great detail how police departments can earn community trust, be accountable, be transparent, be smart. And it was very well received by police officers that I've spoken to. But that's going to be anathema to this administration. What they want, they're going to put their own book. That was called President Obama's Guide to 21st Century Policing. They're going to put out a book which would be President Trump's Guide to 19th Century Policing. Because they want the Wild West. They don't want these reforms for political reasons and because we're heads up. So it basically means that organizations like the ACLU, and probably the ACLU is the most involved, is going to have to replace the Justice Department in bringing this kind of action, which is much more difficult. Luckily, people have really responded in terms of donations, and 1,200 volunteers have come into the affiliate, many of them lawyers, and we're in the process of trying to come up with a system to use people I think feel a tremendous responsibility to use those resources well, and it's, I'm sure that we're going to be able to pull it off. I also think, as 9/11, it looked real bleak. There was tremendous unchecked executive power. There were a raft of terrible laws. Guantanamo was created and put off limits to the rule of law. CIA had secret prisons. There was extraordinary rendition, warrantless wiretapping, torture. And yet, for the most part, those Bush-Cheney policies were beaten back by litigation, by lobbying, but I think a lot because people like yourselves advocated strongly in their communities and saying basically this is not the America that we want. And I think this is a moment that, this is the big one. I mean, this is a fight for humanity, I feel. I don't usually talk that way, but I think this is the fight of our lives. I know when I got my first, any of you ever get letters from Anthony Romero? Every day. Anthony's first letter said, to Trump, we're going to come after you and we're going to bring the full firepower of the ACLU against you. And I kind of read that and I said, come on, Anthony, do you have to use such militaristic language? And I rolled my eyes a little. But I don't feel that way anymore. We have to bring our full firepower. I hope this isn't sacrilegious, but there are good wars, and this is a good war, and we have to win it. Thank you.
Questions and answers? Yeah, we hope. You, sir?
What are the possible repercussions if the Trump administration refuses to follow court orders?
Repeat the question.
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, what are the repercussions if they refuse to follow court orders? Well, that will be very telling. Then we'll have to even escalate our fear and peril. They're going to fight these tooth and nail, and they may even come up with certain areas where they're saying, certainly Nixon and other presidents have said, this is not for the courts to decide, this is for you to decide. But in terms of, for example, what happened yesterday, they cannot, they'll have to follow it. I don't know exactly how to, I can't describe how that would play out, except I just finished a terrific new biography of Hitler. So I can tell you how it played out in Germany. I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler, but it's kind of even, well, because I'm not supposed to. I'm nonpartisan. But that's what it would look like, and I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know. I think there are probably some people that he's appointed who, as terrible as they seem, would not go that far. But we may be in that situation. Love to see. Thank you.
What's the legality of his actions towards people who are legal residents already, denying them entry into the country? Are they being detained too?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the
Yeah, what's the status of legal residents or like green card holders? Are they being detained? Here's what I know. I made, since I was preparing this, and every day something new happens and I just have to start over again. I said, okay, I'm not reading anything after Saturday at 5 o'clock. But my wife told me, she said that they had stepped back from detaining LPRs and they were not going to detain them. But I don't know that. It's my wife told me that. She's a lawyer, but that's all I can say for her.
Well, way back, some of you people, I asked you to stand up and you did. So if you have a question, please raise your hand.
You mentioned two civil rights divisions that were dissolved recently. One was with the DOJ, right?
Yeah.
And the other one was with the DOE.
Yeah.
What was the name of that division?
Yeah, they weren't dissolved.
Oh.
I meant to use the word gutted.
Okay, so repeat the question.
They have not, the two civil rights agencies I mentioned that have been gutted. What I meant by gutted is that the Civil Rights Division of Justice Department does affirmative work around civil rights, promoting, doing police cases, prison cases, desegregation cases. So Vinita Gupta, who is an ACLU associate legal director in New York, she's obviously gone. If not, she's in grave danger. He'll appoint someone else. But Jeff Sessions will make that appointment, and Jeff Sessions is totally against civil rights for his entire career. So they're going to, when Reagan had this situation, he appointed a guy to be the head of the Civil Rights Division who had, his claim to fame was fighting affirmative action, that the rights of white people, and they'll probably pick someone like that. Plus, all the policy level people lead. And then there are the people in civil service, the lawyers. You know, it was a great job. A lot of really bright lawyers went there, and I've gotten a number of calls from bright young lawyers asking me my advice on should they stay and do a little inner resistance or should they leave. And then they usually ask him, is there a job for the ACLU?
What was the name of that?
The second one,
Yeah.
it's called the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. And they're the ones that enforce Title VI, race discrimination, and Title IX, which has been very prominent because Catherine Lehman has made it very prominent. And the policies that have been coming out of those agencies are just the opposite of what Jeff Sessions and, what's her name, Betty Voss. Betty Voss.
This is very interesting what you're saying. A lot of little atrocities going on. There's Parkinson up. But there's something bigger and more dangerous going on with Mr. Trump and his crowd. And it's, I don't know how to address it. But first of all, he's not stupid. We make a big mistake. But he says stupid things, so we laugh at him. But he's speaking to another constituency that agrees with him and that gets out and votes him in. He's not doing this alone. He's got a whole crowd of U.S. citizens behind him saying, yeah. Now, as long as he's got that, how do we stop it?
Well, he didn't get
Repeat the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, after the election, I felt, wow, all these people, these are good.
Repeat, but we don't know the issue.
Oh, what about that Trump has a lot of support? He's not just speaking alone. He's a bright guy. How do we take into account that there's a lot of support, whether it's majority or not?
You've got to change that if you're going to change Trump.
I agree, and the ACLU is not going to be in the front lines of that political battle. But in my mind, here's what I would say. I think clearly from the election that there is, and you put together Trump votes and Bernie Sanders votes, that economic inequality is maybe a bigger atrocity than almost anything we've talked about, certainly broader spreading. People are very angry, and he's manipulated their anger against the media, against Muslims, and he will keep on doing that. I noticed that Wall Street has shown where they're at by the stock market going over 20,000, so they seem to love Trump too, which is not that surprising. But I think that really, if he produces jobs for the white working class people that he was appealing to, and he changes job flight, and suddenly Detroit is like in the 1950s and there are booming car plants, I think he'll be president for life. I think that's not going to happen. But if it does, if he has a good performance, of course he's going to say it's a good performance, whatever, but if he comes across with the goods, that's bad. If he doesn't, I don't think people elected him to do what he's done this weekend. I really don't.
What can we do? He's probably going to put a really conservative person on the Supreme Court. Is there anything we can do about that in addition with fighting everything else that's going on right now?
Repeat the question.
What can we do about a really bad conservative person getting on the Supreme Court? I don't think there is anything we can do. We can raise a lot of hell, and we can try to get the Democrats to fight it. I think they will fight it. They still can filibuster. But eventually someone like Scalia, in fact, I'm nostalgic for Scalia. That's when I get on the Supreme Court.
Way in the back there.
So, say the deportations get cut off by court order. Would Trump be able to double down in tomorrow's Korematsu Day and use something like Korematsu to, instead of using deportations, actually go with internment? Because every time around this year, I kind of hear that Korematsu wasn't overturned, and some people said it was overturned. Could he use that?
I'm glad you asked that.
Repeat it.
The question was, if deportation doesn't work, would it be possible for Trump to set up internment camps like Japanese internment? And that you heard the Korematsu case wasn't overturned. I mean, the whole Korematsu case is the ACLU of Northern California. We brought that case with a lot of cautionary, go slow from national. But we brought that case.
What year did you bring it?
42.
Excuse me?
What year?
40, the decision was 43, so it's in the 40s. And there wasn't even a staff lawyer, but there was Ernie Bessick, and he visited Fred, and Fred said he wanted to fight it, and people were not into fighting the Japanese internment for two reasons. One is people were terrified about a Japanese invasion. Pearl Harbor happened. And secondly, liberals really didn't want to buck Roosevelt, and Roosevelt had decided he had to go along with this. But we fought the case, and the decision was a terrible decision that upheld it, that said it was okay to single out the Japanese because of national security reasons and the evidence. The evidence that was used turned out to be completely false. And 30 years later, we, along with others, brought a writ of coram nobis for Fred to ask the court to reverse his conviction. We got in front of Judge Patel in San Francisco, and she reversed his conviction, but it did not go to the Supreme Court. So that precedent still exists. But I would have said 2 weeks ago, but everyone agrees that it's a dead letter. But I'm not saying everyone agrees that it's a dead letter. I don't think that's the road that they would go. But I'm not,
Okay, we have time for just two more questions. One over there.
Looking at the age of this crowd, I'm reasonably sure I'm not the only retired lawyer in the room. What can people who are no longer admitted to the who are inactive with the state bar, or law students in the room? I bet there are law students in the room. People who are not yet admitted to the bar. How can we help?
Well, how can lawyers, young or old, who aren't active members of the bar help? Well, I think on an immediate level, especially out in the communities, the advocacy that's going to be needed, having legal training, would be a tremendous benefit to reaching out to people. I mean, when you're going into Muslim community, immigrant community, talking about your rights, I think your background would make you, and I know the ACLU is planning to train people to greatly increase the number of people who are going out to the community. I guess we want to accompany everyone who gets an FBI interview. But I guess you have to be a lawyer to do that. And then when raids happen, we're going to set up or revive a rapid response network that we had in the Bay Area, where people are ready to respond quickly when there's a raid, to gather the facts, to interview witnesses, because it's really important, especially with people who have uncertain immigration status. And that's another area where your legal background, I think would be a great assistance.
Okay, we have time for about two more questions. Somebody way in the back there in the green.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk and for all that the ACLU is doing. I have a question, but first I have to preface it by saying that after the election in the New Yorker, there was an article, and it mentioned that when Schwarzenegger was our governor, that the budget hadn't been passed, and he said that they would reduce all of the salaries of public officials to minimum wage until they passed the budget. But John Chang, who was then the treasurer, I guess, or whoever the person that wrote out the checks, he refused to write the checks, and so that never happened. So what I'm wondering is, if, say, there were civil servants who refused to go along with what Trump and his administration are doing, and the attorney generals in these states refuse to come to their support, would the ACLU step in and help these civil servants as they oppose perhaps actions by the Trump administration?
Repeat the question.
Yeah. I think the question, I didn't get the Schwarzenegger-John Chang analogy,
Okay,
but I
yeah.
think the question was
Yeah.
if state and local officials
Right.
refuse to go along with federal directives that they're bound to go along with, would the ACLU defend them? You know, the ACLU has never defended civil disobedience in the sense that our attitude has been we've encouraged civil disobedience as a means of protest, but we've never argued that you can break the law and then don't have to suffer any consequences. And it seems like what you're describing is civil disobedience and people would get fired. I don't know. It's not the first thing I would think of, but there would be that problem, kind of conceptually, that if they're not signing checks, I don't know if that's the kind of protest we would defend people on.
Yeah, I think he gave his reasons for why he didn't do it, but I won't explain anymore.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Tell them to call the complaint line.
Okay, let's see, we have one over here who's had her hand up a very long time. We'll have just one more question after this.
It seems to me that Trump is making law. I wonder when and if Congress can get involved.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Trump is making law. When can Congress get involved? I mean, the irony is that the Republicans have spent 4 years accusing President Obama of making law by issuing executive orders. And yet those same Republicans, like Paul Ryan, think what's going on is great, very efficient. Yeah, Congress can stand up, but the horror of our situation is that it's a his party is in power. And there haven't been many overt signs that they're going to stand up to him. Hopefully that'll happen. You know, there are, just a few votes would really change things.
We have a king now.
Yeah.
He can make any law he wants. Is that true?
No.
Can you repeat that?
No.
Repeat it, please.
But he, no. Oh, do we have a king now? No. No, king is too nice a word. I just finished watching The Crown, so I'm very nostalgic of royalty. But we do have someone who, whether he's smart or not, I believe he doesn't really care about constitutional limits, checks and balances. He's doing his reality show, and he's just exercising his will. And the fact that chaos ensues, he doesn't mind that either. We do.
Wait, there are other people with one last question.
Thank you.
On the floor.
Hi, so I'm a resident of Seaside, and the weeks after the election, I asked my Seaside mayor and city councilman to enact policy prohibiting the police from cooperating with federal agents on immigration. And the answer which I got from some, although not all members of the city council, was, that sounds like a very nice policy that nobody will support it, and we're afraid of losing federal dollars for programs in our city. So my question is, what kind of alternative funding are going to be available that might induce city councilmen to do what is right?
Well, they're...
Repeat.
Oh, she's approached her city council in Seaside to essentially ask them to become a sanctuary city. And they said, that's a good idea, but we don't want to lose the money. Well, one thing, and you know, maybe people, because I'm not really working in this area doing this, there definitely is a legal position paper that could be written that would explain why he can't do what he's doing, and that I think would be a good thing to have, and we should do that. Mickey, remind me. You know, and then it's a question of the political will and whether they're serious or not, or whether they're hiding behind that. You know, I don't know. But it's kind of, I definitely think for those cities who want to take that step, they will both have legal arguments and probably will have the ACLU on their side in court.
What about the court decision that overturned Obama's executive order on immigration deportation? It said he didn't have the constitutional authority for that. Wouldn't that serve as precedent to overturn some of these?
Oh, you mean,
Repeat.
Oh, yeah.
All right, this is one last question after the last question. We should probably move on with the program.
Obama, because he couldn't get immigration reform, enacted by executive order a provision that benefited the Dreamers and gave benefits to a certain class of people who had been born here, and gave them rights they didn't have before. And a bunch of right-wing states found a judge in Brownsville, Texas, who did what this judge did yesterday, issued a nationwide stay. At that point, I think I said, I hate nationwide stays, but and that's been, it was a 4-4 vote in the Supreme Court, but that has completely stopped that program. Now the arguments about it, all the arguments aren't the same. This is a discrimination case, and that's a case of beyond the powers. The president has a lot of power to decide who gets in and who doesn't get in, countrywide. So this is a much harder case. But.
Do you want one more question or not?
Of course.
One more.
What would happen if we stopped paying our taxes?
What would happen if you stopped paying your taxes? You should speak to your accountant. You know, that's a recognized form of protest that's been engaged in. A lot, you know, people have gone to jail for it.
Flood the jail.
Huh?
Flood the jails. Be a line out the door.
Well, let me thank Alan.
All right. Is Elliot in the room or is he out in the hall?
Right there.
All right, Elliot, will you please come up here? So for those of you who don't know, this is Elliot Ruchowitz-Roberts. And he has been an active member in this chapter for 30 years. And so the board has nominated him for the Francis Heisler Award. Francis Heisler was a previous board member who was instrumental in starting the Monterey College of Law. This award has not been awarded since 2008, when we had one of our board members fighting Prop 8. It is more difficult to pinpoint exactly why we are giving Elliot this award because he has had the long game. He has this quiet leadership, this way of having patience on issues and working through them and trying again and again. One of the issues he worked, I don't know how many times you visited the jail, to try to get Know Your Rights campaign started in our jails. He had staff attorneys set up to come down to the jails on numerous occasions for events, and he would show up that day and would be told it was not happening. He did this for I don't know how many years. Finally, this year, working with our public defender, there was a class action lawsuit that I know Elliot was working on quietly behind the scenes. And the jails now have Know Your Rights posters, big, large ones, laminated all over the place. employee rights and LGBTQ student rights. He is any civil rights issue that you can imagine. I believe Elliot has been there quietly behind the scenes. And so the board would like to present him with this award. Not only the board, but State Senate Majority Leader Bill Monning has recognized Elliot, and I would like to invite him up here. Thank you,
Well, good afternoon. It's a great turnout. I'd say there's at least 1.5 million people here. Alternative facts. I also want to thank Alan Schlosser, an old friend, an advocate. Alan, I don't know if you saw my wife Dana, but you represented her in 1976 with UFW picket lines in New York against wall-bound stores and kept them out of jail by protecting First Amendment rights by fighting those overly broad and illegal injunctions. So thank you for your decades of work and for joining us this afternoon. Thank you. I also just want to thank Arlene and Mickey and all the members of the board of the ACLU Monterey County chapter for your wisdom in putting a spotlight on Elliot this afternoon for his decades of not just work, but leadership. And we partnered on some of these fights. The county jail one was mentioned, and some of that work followed. We got reports out of the county jail that the sheriff's deputies on duty were playing a cassette tape from the movie Full Metal Jacket that was full of racial epithets over the PA system in the jail on a Sunday morning. And it was when word of that was received that the ACLU was part of the response that has led to years of vigilance that has led to better protection in treating inmates with dignity and as human beings. It is indeed my honor to recognize Elliot for his years of work with this Senate resolution. And let me just read, in recognition of Elliot Ruchowitz-Roberts, on receipt of the Francis Heisler Award, in appreciation of your many years of steadfast leadership of the ACLU Monterey County chapter, your representation of the chapter with the ACLU of Northern California, and for your many contributions to the cause of civil liberties, human rights, and the arts. You've combined the power of words and poetry to mobilize people and the ACLU to defend the U.S. Constitution and the rights of all people with great respect and admiration from the California State Senate.
Well, I'll say a few words. And first of all, thank you all for coming. It's a tremendous turnout, and I think working together, we're going to fight this. So it's a great honor for me to receive the Francis Heisler Award for Civil Liberties, in part because it's been given me by my peers, my fellow board members of the Monterey County chapter of the ACLU of Northern California, a group of volunteers dedicated to the ACLU's mission of preserving, expanding, and defending civil liberties. In a way, this award honors them all, for no one ever accomplishes anything outside of community. and here's this community here, right?
Yeah.
Without that community, I would not be standing here accepting this award today. This is also a great honor because of the board members before me who have received the award. People who exemplify not only the dedication of the ACLU to civil liberties, but the incredible scope, the wide range of issues we have dealt with in Monterey County for so many years. Looking at these honorees, I have great hope that we will resist the imminent threats to civil liberties we face at all levels, local, statewide, national. There is Dick Criley, who served for many years as the chapter's executive director and was honored by the ACLU of Northern California with its prestigious Chief Justice Earl Warren Award. Dick understood the need for inclusion and focused on finding strength in working with others on coalition building, still an important priority for our chapter. He initiated our Bill of Rights Day fundraising drive for the ACLU of Northern California Foundation. Our chapter members over the years have donated over $250,000 to the Foundation for Northern California and the National Foundation for their litigation, public policy, and education work. The donations from our members were behind yesterday's ACLU's legal action, because that's where they get their support, from the grassroots level, supporting their legal efforts. The Monterey County chapter is the only one of 18 chapters in Northern California to reach out to its members to support the ACLU of Northern California Foundation. This past year, we've raised over $19,000, the highest ever, but still short of our goal of $20,000. So if anyone would like to donate, we would love it. I admired Dick Criley for his intelligence, his commitment, and his bulldog obstinacy. When he lived in Chicago, he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and listening to his defiance on tape still gives me goosebumps. When asked whether he was invoking his rights under the Fifth Amendment to avoid self-incrimination, he responded that he was invoking his First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and freedom of association. Given the challenges we most certainly will face, Dick serves as a model for standing up to abusive government authority. Then there was Samson Knoll, a clear thinker, a brilliant mind who articulated policy issues with incredible clarity and thoughtfulness, something which seems sorely lacking with our new president and his administration. And Mickey Welsh, who chaired our chapter's legal committee for so many years with her concern for the centrality of the Constitution in our democracy, how it holds our society together. At a rally for unity and justice held just last week, she led those assembled in the presidential oath to uphold the Constitution, a poignant and defiant response to a president who seemingly does not value it or the Bill of Rights. And Dan Craig, who for many years chaired our complaint line committee, reaching out to community members who called for assistance, especially regarding issues of criminal justice and police practices. Dan not only heard what people were saying, but he also acted for them, at times accompanying people to police stations so they could file complaints. And Liz Leeper.
My mom!
Okay, you can tell us about your mom. Who actively and aggressively worked on the complaint line also, and really kind of was just such a strong advocate on every issue that came before our chapter. And in a way, I wish you were here with us today, because she'd just still be giving them hell. And Michael Manlin, who served for many years on the chapter's legal committee and who wrote a complaint line manual for volunteers, which was adopted by the ACLU of Northern California. E. Walker James, who focused on education issues, especially the rights of students and eliminating the school to prison pipeline. Steve Reese, another legal committee volunteer, who focused on criminal justice issues and led a statewide effort to end the death penalty. Alice Ann Glenn, whose work focused on LGBT rights in the religious community and homeless issues, especially as they related to women. When I look at these Heisler Award winners, each of whom has in a distinct and unique way worked to preserve and expand and defend our civil liberties. I am both honored and humbled to accept this award. But I also see in them the qualities we need today to meet the challenges we face: strength, perseverance, skill, wisdom, experience, and love. Dick Criley was a neighbor of mine in Carmel Highlands. He lived on the west side of Highway 1, I on the base of the mountain on the east side. Often I would hear him splitting wood, so when I sat down to write an elegy for him after he died, that image rose to the surface. Splitting wood, elegy for Dick Criley. The metal maul striking the metal wedge, like the clapper hitting the inside of a bell, drifts up the mountainside over the coast highway. Rings above the tremulous cadence of the waves, the ocean speaking as oceans do, of a world so like a darkling plain where ignorant armies clash by night. Splitting wood, the heft of the 12-pound maul, the deliberate slow raising above the shoulders, the grip on earth of outspread feet, the life of muscles rocking soft and smooth and moist, the arc above the head, then falling by its own weight, guided by the miracle of human sight, shoulder, arms, hands, eyes so coordinated that the flat head of the maul strikes solidly, squarely on the flat head of the wedge. Hits true and rings, and wood splits, the halves of the round falling cleanly from the block. The way your mind worked, focused so clearly, so cleanly, you knew the grain of what stood before you, how to place the wedge. You cleaved issues, and while you could not, no human can, some things too gnarled to split. Stop the waves from echoing on the shore, stop the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. You let us hear the pure sound of what could be, of a world attuned to the common good, where love and need are one and all honored. Now, only memory, the sound of you splitting wood, the maul handle you have worn smooth waits for our hands. You have shown us how we go on. Now before us the woodpile, cypress, pine, oak, madrone, eucalyptus, waiting to be split. Vicki Welsh is also a dear friend, and when she and her longtime partner Kathy Stoner were married in San Francisco City Hall on February 16, 2004, after Mayor Gavin Newsom approved the issuance of marriage licenses by the city county clerk, I wrote Revolution, a poem celebrating their marriage. I read the poem at the reception held later that year in their backyard in Pacific Grove. 6 months later, the California Supreme Court invalidated the marriage on the grounds that the mayor did not have the authority to contravene state law, which defined marriages between a man and a woman after the passage of Prop 22 in 2000. After the California Supreme Court ruled Proposition 22 unconstitutional, in May of 2008, Mickey and Kathy were married on July 5th, 2008, which was the 34th anniversary of their living together. I read the poem once again at their wedding ceremony. Revolution, for Mickey and Kathy, in celebration of your marriage on February 16th, 2004. I had thought revolution's core was rage and hatred, robed in ideals pristine and unattainable like freedom, or dictatorship of the proletariat, or all power to the people. But never until now have I known love as revolution's heart, and such joy. Yours is not a revolt, but a revolving, an axial turning, the way the earth revolves on its axis, an orbital turning, earth revolving around sun and moon around earth. Love's gravity sweeps me into this revolution, so we have become brother and sisters. Sisters, you are writing and rewriting history, for is not love hidden and much maligned at the heart of all revolution? Your love turns our world on its axis. Now we can see you, bathed in light entire, no dark side of the moon any longer. And so, dear sisters, here's to love that makes history, to revolutions that bring such joy to our hearts, to acts that dispel darkness, to revolving planets and moons, and all your act has set in motion, a spinning in my own heart, and these whirling words, testament to this tangible freedom of spirit, this dictatorship of the heart, this power to all people who open themselves to love. We have them all, and the wedges. We have the power because we have opened ourselves to love. Time to split wood. Time for revolution. Thank you.
But Elliot actually sent out a nice lengthy written year in review, so I'm going to skip that and call Charlotte Hallam up here. Charlotte's the nominating chair.
I'm the chair of the nominating committee, and I'm just going to read the names of the persons who are nominated to serve on the ACLU Board of Directors. It's possible for nominations to come from the floor if anybody wishes to make one. No, it's not. I just told no, it's not. Okay. Anyway, for those of you who are here today, if you'd stand when your name is read, I'd appreciate it. John Bailey, Joseph Belmont, Michelle Biddle, here. Helen Davis, here. Geraldine Edwards, here. Renee Franken, here. Patty Fashion, Elaine Gurman, Nelson Graff, Arlene Haffa, Charlotte Hallam, me, Nibs McCarthy, Mary Kay Norsing, William Rawson, David Richard, Veronica Ripley, Elliot Ruchowitz-Roberts, Carl Walling, Michelle Welch, Jan Ziegler, and William Ziegler. Woohoo! Okay, this comes as a motion to elect these persons, so all in favor, please state so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? This is your new nominated group, the new board, and we will welcome other people who are interested in joining us later during the year. Thank you.
So that concludes our program. I invite you all to hang out and be a community for a while and figure out what you're going to do next.